Hey guys, tonight we're setting sail slowly, gently, like a weather-worn sloop drifting out from a sleepy Caribbean cove. You're barefoot on the deck, the planks warm from the sun, the salty air brushing past your face like a lazy breeze. Through linen curtains, ropes creak above you, seagulls complain overhead. The ocean rocks beneath you in a rhythm old as time. You look around and realize you're on a pirate ship, but not the kind from movies. No swashbuckling sword fights. No pirates squawking clutch s. Instead, this ship is, dare we say, oddly well organized. People are actually cooperating. There's a system. Of course, you probably wouldn't last a day out here. Between the constant risk of scurvy, sunburn, and someone snoring too loud in a hammock next to you, it's a logistical nightmare. But lucky for you, you're just a sleepy observer tonight.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the deck, and the first thing that surprises you after not immediately being made to swab it is how calm everything seems. The crew doesn't bark orders, no one swinging from ropes or bellowing about doubloons. Instead, you see a group of sunburned sailors calmly negotiating something over a weather-stained chart. The air smells like tar, fish, and faintly molasses. 18th century pirates, it turns out, are not the reckless loners you might have assumed. They're not just scavengers of gold, but of structure-plucking useful habits from naval life, merchant customs, and, bizarrely, radical, democratic ideals. Their lives depended on functioning as a unit, because unlike a Royal Navy crew, no one was forced to be here. You could leave assuming you didn't mind swimming. That's the first real shocker. Most pirate crews in the early 1700s operated entirely by choice. Not conscription, not orders barked under duress. Choice, mutual interest, and a general desire not to die alone on a splintered raft somewhere off Madagascar.so. When you look closer, you see that their cooperation isn't accidental. It's practical. It's the difference between capturing a prize ship and drifting aimlessly until the biscuits mold. Historians still argue whether this cohesion came from shared hardship or deliberate ideology, but either way, it worked. Let's rewind a little. You've just joined a pirate crew somewhere in the golden age of piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730. Maybe you're a disgruntled sailor, sick of being underpaid and whipped in the Royal Navy. Or maybe you were captured during a raid, and when given the choice, shrugged and thought, why not? Either way, you're here now. No flashy initiation ceremony, just some eye contact, a gruff nod, and a quiet agreement to pull your weight. You're handed a task, maybe coiling ropes, maybe peeling weevils out of the biscuit barrel. Either way, you're expected to do your bit, because on this ship, nobody gets a free ride. Not even the captain. You see, pirate ships weren't top-down operations. Everyone had a say. The crew elected their captain and, more importantly, their quartermaster, who basically acted as the voice of the people. You will meet him later, don't worry. Right now, you're still finding your sea legs. You walk past hammocks strung like sleepy cocoons. Someone's patching a sail by hand, humming what might be a lullaby or a threat. It's hard to tell. You glance over the railing and see flying fish skimming the water like skipping stones. A dolphin breaches, unimpressed. Every few days, the ship holds informal meetings. The whole crew gathers, bare feet slapping the deck, some half awake. One guy definitely chewing on a mango he didn't share, and decisions are made. Routes debated, targets discussed. If someone's been slacking, or snoring too loud, or heaven forbids stealing rum, the crew discusses it openly. Votes are held. Not always calm, but always equal. It's a strange contrast to life in the merchant navy, where brutal discipline reigned. There, officers held near absolute power, and sailors had about as much say as a barnacle. On pirate ships, different story. Even punishments were collective decisions. You wouldn't be lashed for every mistake, maybe just publicly shamed, or temporarily banned from the rum ration. That'll sting. Literally, since water's mostly gone stale, and citrus is a rare luxury. Oh, and speaking of citrus, someone passes by offering you a wedge of lime. They're experimenting with scurvy prevention. It's not official science yet, but it's catching on. Pirates, despite their reputation, were early adopters of whatever worked. They couldn't afford stubbornness. You sit down near the galley, where a pot of something vaguely edible is bubbling. Maybe it's turtle stew. Maybe it's yesterday's stew, just rebranded. Someone drops in a pinch of salt with reverence, like it's powdered gold. One cook, 3 helpers, and at least one guy who just wants to lick the spoon. The teamwork here isn't perfect, of course. There are squabbles, pranks, and long debates over who last borrowed whose knife. But there's a clear understanding. Cooperation means survival, and survival means another day chasing treasure, telling stories, and napping under sailcloth while the wind does most of the work. It's quieter now. The sun's slipping down toward the horizon. A gull lands on a rail, thinks better of it, and flies off. Someone sings a line of a sea shanty, half asleep, and another hums along. You're just a listener, floating along in this strange little democracy afloat where gold glitters. But fairness matters more, and even the roughest sailor might share his last lemon wedge if you ask nicely. You're awoken not by cannon fire, or a pirate shouting nonsense from the crow's nest, but by the gentle clunk of a wooden cup being set beside you. Someone's left you a ration of water. It's tepid, smells faintly of barrel, and you suspect it's been filtered through optimism rather than anything actually hygienic. Still, the gesture is unexpectedly kind. That's the theme aboard this ship. Practicality, laced with rough courtesy. As you blink the sleep from your eyes. The crew gathers mid-deck again. Not to brawl, not to divvy up gold, but to vote. Today's issue, whether or not to pursue a spotted merchant sloop drifting lazily on the horizon. It's not urgent. Nothing really is, except the food going soft in the hold. But what's curious is that no single person gets to decide, not even the captain. Pirate democracy. It sounds like a contradiction, like polite have and brawl or low-stakes mutiny. But here it is in action. You sit cross-legged on the deck, soaking it all in. The crew doesn't shout over each other. Well, not too much. There's a show of hands, a few grumbles, and the decision is made. They'll wait for better wind and let that sloop go. It might be empty, too risky. Majority rules. Historians still argue whether this pirate democracy was born out of ideology or necessity. Were these salty men political thinkers in disguise? Or did they just hate being bossed around? Most likely, a bit of both. Many had fled Navy life, where captains had absolute authority and punishments could be brutal. Democracy, for pirates, wasn't a lofty goal, it was a survival tactic. Power shared meant fewer mutinies, better morale, and less chance of being tossed overboard by a furious crew. You watch the captain, older, sun-tanned, with the beginnings of a beard, braid, shrug and smile. He wasn't in favor of the vote, but he accepts it. He knows his role. On pirate ships, the captain was elected, often for skill in battle or navigation. But outside of combat, he had no more say than anyone else. You pace around, thinking about what kind of system this really is. It's not chaos. It's not pure freedom, either. It's a kind of shipwood republic, fierce and functional. And if a captain started acting like a tyrant, he could be removed quickly, sometimes even mid-voyage. Some records describe entire crews switching out captains like changing hats. Too loud, one might say. Too bossy, says another. Then they vote, shake hands, and sail on. No hard feelings. Usually. As you wander toward the bow, a younger sailor explains that captains often had to win the crew over every single day. Leadership wasn't permanent, it was performative. You had to earn your crew's respect, keep them fed, and not hoard the fancy biscuits. Otherwise, you'd be replaced, or worse, ignored. There's a famous example. Captain Benjamin Hornigold, known for being a stickler for no attacking British ships, was eventually voted out by his crew for being too strict, too careful. They wanted more action, less ethics. So, off he went. That's pirate HR in action. You sit by a pile of tangled nets as the sun climbs higher. Someone nearby sewing a button back on with thick thread and enormous concentration. You wonder aloud what happens when there's a tie vote. A nearby pirate grins, missing a few teeth. Flip a coin, he says. Or arm wrestle. It's hard to tell if he's joking. The idea of pirates as ruthless criminals is certainly true in part. They robbed, they pillaged, they occasionally made unpleasant use of sharp objects. But their own crews, that was different. Order mattered. Rules mattered. Even voting mattered. And here's where it gets a little cheeky. Naval officers, especially those from the Royal Navy, sometimes envied this structure. It wasn't uncommon for Navy sailors to desert and join pirate crews precisely because of this sense of fairness. On pirate ships, you had a voice. You got your share. You weren't just another soggy cog in the maritime machine. You leaned back, against a crate of something suspiciously citrusy and watch as a mock election is held for fun, apparently. Someone's been nominated as pudding officer, responsible for making sure dessert, usually a dried fig or a single sweet biscuit, is divided fairly on feast days. Everyone laughs, but they still vote. Democracy doesn't sleep, even when it's ridiculous. Your mind drifts. You picture the Atlantic, dotted with ships, some flying the black flag, others unaware they're being watched. On one of those ships, a captain yells orders no one likes. On this one, things are different. Here, power is lent, not taken. And the vote rules all, still. This isn't utopia. There are arguments. One sailor insists another is hiding good tobacco. Another grumbles about snoring again. But instead of knives, they use words. And if it escalates, that's what the quartermaster's for, but we'll get to him later. Now, as the wind picks up, the crew moves in synchrony to adjust the sails. No one needs shouting. Everyone knows the drill. Like ants in a sleepy colony, they all play their part quietly, rhythmically. One holds the rope. One climbs the mast. Another watches the horizon with a spyglass made from brass and too many barnacles. You feel the ship move under you, not just physically, but socially. This thing floats because people pull together. And the voting, that's the secret. The invisible rope tying every pirate to the mast as dusk begins to stretch across the water. The captain leans on the rail beside you. Wasn't always like this, he mutters. But it's better than being ruled by a man who doesn't know your name. Then he hands you a biscuit. It's dry, probably older than the ship, but you eat it anyway. Pirate democracy, it turns out, tastes like salt, crumbs, and unexpected equality. The next morning, or whatever passes for morning when your alarm clock is the smell of frying fish and the scrape of a fiddle bow tuning up at dawn, you wake to a curious ceremony happening mid-deck. No swords, no shouting, just a few men hunched over a piece of parchment, nodding seriously. One of them has a large feather tucked behind his ear, like a tropical bird wandered into an office meeting. You shuffle closer and realize they're writing something. It's not a treasure map. It's a contract. This sleepy sailor is the Articles of Agreement, the beating bureaucratic heart of any proper pirate crew. Unlike the chaotic cutthroat image you might have imagined, pirate life was underpinned by structure. Not just voting, but paperwork. Glorious, oddly meticulous paperwork. Every crew drafted its own version of the articles, a set of rules that governed everything from behavior to booty. You squat beside the group and peer at the rough, inky script. It's charmingly uneven, possibly written on stolen parchment using ink made from soot and spit. One rule says no gambling during work hours. Another forbids fighting on deck unless the quartermaster agrees to referee. There's even a clause about bedtime silence, a harsh clause, because nothing kills teamwork faster than someone loudly reminiscing about past plunder while others are trying to nap. The articles vary ship to ship, but certain things are surprisingly common. Equal shares of treasure, provisions for injuries, specific duties for each row on board, and perhaps most shockingly, a detailed system of compensation based on risk. Lose a leg, that's 800 pieces of 8. An eye, still valuable. One pirate crew even had a line item for severed fingers. Pirates, ever practical, knew that danger was part of the job, and fairness kept people motivated. Historians still debate how strictly these articles were enforced. Some say they were more of a guideline. Others insist they were sacred. But we know they existed. We've found copies, and not as museum pieces, real, worn, folded, sometimes with fingerprints still visible, ink smudged by rain and rum. A nearby sailor, noticing your interest, explains how the articles are read aloud to every new crew member. It's part ritual, part legal briefing. You don't just join a pirate crew, you agree to it. Consent matters. Even at sea, you raise an eyebrow and ask, so, this is like a pirate HR manual? He laughs. Aye. Except you don't. Get vacation days, just slightly fewer bruises if you follow the rules. You ask to read more. The next clause you find states that anyone caught stealing from their shipmates would be marooned, alone, with just a bottle of water and a pistol loaded, with a single shot for company, as the saying went. Chilling, yes, but even that consequence had its procedure. A vote, a hearing. Pirate justice wasn't exactly soft, but it wasn't random. One article declares that lights out must occur by 9 p.m. unless the ship is under threat, or someone has a birthday, in which case mild exceptions may apply. Another insists that all musical instruments be shared equally, and no one is allowed to hold the fiddle during calm weather unless they're really good. It's a mix of harsh and hilarious, like a community HOA crossed with a pirate sitcom. You wander back toward the galley, chuckling to yourself. Somewhere in this absurd floating contract is a clause stating that no one may bring a goat aboard without prior crew approval. You don't ask. As you sit near a small fire being carefully tended in a lidded brazier, because even pirates don't want to burn down their only home. A sailor walks by carrying a plank under one arm. It's freshly carved, inscribed with the ship's motto. Something about freedom, or wind, or possibly just don't drop the biscuits. It's hard to translate nautical humor sometimes. Then comes the signing. Each crew member, one by one, approaches the parchment and makes a mark. Not everyone can write. Some draw symbols, an anchor, a fish, a crude face. One man stamps his muddy thumbprint and nods solemnly. You realize that this moment matters to them, not because it's fancy, but because it's theirs. This contract, full of spelling errors and smudged ink, represents something most of them never had before: a say in their working conditions. The articles turn an outlaw crew into something resembling a union, or maybe a very flexible workers seal up with occasional swordplay. You ask someone what happens if someone refuses to sign. He shrugs. Then they're not crew, and they don't get paid. It's simple math. No signature, no share, no security. Even pirates, it seems, know how to hold people accountable with paperwork. You wander below deck again, where hammocks sway like sleepy jellyfish. One has a crude chart pinned above it. Someone's trying to track who owes whom for what. There's even a ledger recording past hauls and who took what. It's all written in code, or maybe just terrible handwriting. Another sailor is sewing a pouch shut, careful not to spill the coins inside. He tells you proudly that he once caught another crew member trying to short him to silver pieces. Try to say I took more than my cut, he says, eyes narrowed. We measured it with a scale. Yes, pirates had scales. Of course they did. You stretch out, the sway of the ship making your limbs feel soft and silly. You try to imagine another job where you'd be asked to vote on your hours, agree to your own salary, and be given insurance for accidental cannonball damage. You can't, and yet, here you are floating in a sleepy democracy, bound not just by sail and rope, but by shared rules scribbled in molasses-stained ink. The parchment flutters quietly in the breeze, as if it too has settled in for a nap. By now, you've learned that pirates had a curious knack for logistics, especially when it came to food. You might expect them to hoard their gold and fight over scraps like hungry raccoons, but surprisingly, they were sticklers for fairness. Even at the dinner table, as you settle into a spot on the deck, warmed by the mid-morning sun, a smell wafts over: salt pork, dried peas, and something suspiciously fishy. It's meal time. Down in the hold, the cook, an older man with a limp and a permanent scowl, has been at work since sunrise. He stirs a large pot with a spoon the size of a canoe paddle. Pirates didn't eat lavishly, but what they did eat was shared with almost mathematical precision. Today's stew is being served in dented bowls, each portion carefully measured. No favoritism, no captain's cut, just equal shares whether you were the navigator or the guy whose main duty was, essentially, cannonball fetcher. One bowl, one scoop, next man. It's a bit like soup kitchen socialism. With more sharks nearby, you glance at the ledger again. Yes, there's actually a food log, and notice that rations are adjusted only slightly based on role. The cook gets a bit more salt. The powder monk is young boys who hoard gunpowder. During fights, get extra citrus when available. Everyone else, standard spoonfuls. Sharing food fairly was essential because resentment spreads faster than spoiled fish. And speaking of spoilage, pirate ships had no refrigeration, just salted meats, hardtack biscuits, and dried beans. Occasionally they'd catch turtles or fish, and every so often they'd land and grab fresh supplies. You help pass up some oranges, still fragrant and bright, a gift from a coastal trader who preferred friendliness to robbery. Historians still debate how effective pirate provisioning really was. Some argue they were constantly on the brink of starvation. Others point to records showing surprisingly varied diets: dried mangoes, rice, even coffee in some cases. It all depended on what they could trade, steal, or scavenge. One sailor, with a face like weathered driftwood, tells you a story about a ship that once bartered gunpowder for pickled cabbage. Best week of me life, he says, tearing into his biscuit. We didn't even mutiny once. Still, the food wasn't glamorous. You bite into a biscuit and nearly crack a molar. Hardtack, as it was called, was notorious for being harder than a cannonball and filled with tiny holes, some caused by baking, others by weevils. You brush one away discreetly. Extra protein, someone mutters behind you. And yet, it's not the quality of the food that matters most. It's the distribution. Fair portions build trust. Trust kept crews together. Crews that stuck together survived. Next, you notice something fascinating. When a ship captured treasure, gold, cloth, spices, even barrels of wine, the loot wasn't just piled in the captain's quarters. No, it was brought on deck and inventoried publicly. The quartermaster, often flanked by two crewmates acting as auditors, would record what was taken, where it came from, and how it would be split. Each person got a set share of the plunder. The captain might receive 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5, and everyone else 1 share. It wasn't entirely equal, but it was predictably unequal. No secrets, no surprises, and if someone tried to smuggle a little extra silk into their hammock, that's where things got awkward. You hear about a man who once hid coins in the lining of his boots. When discovered, he was made to walk barefoot for a week and clean the sheep's chamber pots. Harsh? Maybe. Effective? Definitely. To your side. Someone opens a small chest filled with coins, buttons, and what looks like a curved ivory comb. The coins are being sorted again just to make sure they weren't counted wrong. Pirates, you learn, loved treasure, but they loved accounting just as much. It's all part of a broader ethic. Share the risk, share the reward. These men faced storms, battles, disease, and boredom together. When the gold came in, it made no sense to reward only the flashy or loud. Even the guy who patched sails during rainstorms deserved his cut. You think back to the captain, sipping water from a tin cup like everyone else. No crystal goblet, no silk cushions, just a man doing his job and getting his fair, if slightly larger slice of the pie. The fairness extended beyond treasure and food too. Extra rum rations might be awarded for bravery or cleverness, but they were voted on. If someone got an extra spoon of jam, you can bet it was discussed at length. Pirates, it seems, had a strange love of group decision-making, even if it was about dessert. You laugh quietly at the thought of a group of sunburned pirates holding a vote on who deserves the last fig. But you realize that's exactly the point. Order in the chaos. Structure inside the storm. As the sun dips lower and mealtime ends, bowls are stacked, spoons wiped, and one man sings a sea shanty about a fish that looked like his mother-in-law. Another pirate complains, but only mildly. That's teamwork for you. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the wind and the clatter of bowls being stowed. No shouting, no hoarding, just full bellies, shared burdens, and the quiet knowledge that tomorrow the process begins again equally together under sail. The next time you wake, it's to the sound of hammering sharp taps carrying across the deck in a measured rhythm. You rub your eyes and peek over the side of your hammock, wondering if it's another maintenance day. But no, it's something more intriguing. A sailor is fashioning a crude prosthetic leg out of carved wood and leather straps. You climb down to get a closer look, and another crewmate nods to the injured man. Lost it boarding a sloop last month, he whispers, almost reverently. Got 300 pieces of 8 for the trouble. Wait, he got paid for getting maimed? Indeed he did. Because here's a little known fact. 18th-century pirates, for all their rough edges, operated one of the earliest forms of injury insurance at sea. You limp, you earn. It wasn't generosity, it was policy. Pirate ships didn't have health insurance in the modern sense, but they did recognize that losing an arm, eye, or toe in battle meant you couldn't work and therefore couldn't earn. So, long before labor unions and government compensation programs, pirates were already cutting checks, or more often, cutting coins. You sit cross-legged next to the crew's quartermaster, more on him soon, and leaf through the ship's logbook. Inside is a neat list of injuries and their corresponding payouts. Right arm, 600 pieces of 8 left leg, 500 one eye, 100 several fingers. Negotiable, depending on how many and which hand are missing ear. That one comes with a bottle of rum and an apology. Historians still argue whether these amounts were always honored, or whether they were more symbolic than literal. But there's plenty of evidence that pirate crews took them seriously. After all, no one wanted to be left broke and limbless. You glance at the injured man again. He's grinning, one leg outstretched, as another crewman ties the final strap on his new wooden leg. Someone's painted a little octopus on the side for flair. Another pirate offers him a bite of dried mango. They slap backs. They laugh. It's oddly wholesome. And here's the thing. These payouts weren't just goodwill. They were strategic. Pirates needed everyone to feel protected. A crew that knew it would be taken care of in battle fought harder, more confidently, and more loyally. No one wanted a hesitant shipmate next to them when the cannonballs started flying. You ask if anyone's ever faked an injury to get the payout. The quartermaster chuckles. Tried once, he says. Fella claimed he lost a toe. Forgot which foot. We made him hop for a week just to be sure. Aside from major injuries, even smaller hardships were acknowledged. If a sailor fell sick, he might be given lighter duties. Lost his hammock to rats, the crew might vote to let him bunk in a shared space. Again, it wasn't generosity, it was mutual interest. If one of you goes down, the rest suffer. Pirate teamwork is, at its core, just highly motivated empathy. You stroll over to a barrel where medical supplies are kept. Supplies might be too generous a term. There's a pot of honey, a handful of herbs, and a small, very suspicious bottle of laudanum. A tooth extractor lies next to a rusty knife and a flask labeled Doctor's Helper, which is definitely just rum. The ship's surgeon, if you can call him that, is a man with a steady hand, a nervous laugh, and zero formal training. But he knows how to clean a wound, set a bone, and talk someone through pain with humor. His fee? Equal shares and no questions about how he got that scar on his neck. Even the hammocks themselves reflect a certain kind of care. Tightly strung, spaced out to avoid fights, and assigned by lottery every few weeks so no one gets too comfortable in the good spot near the lantern. There's even a rule that no one can steal someone else's blanket. That might sound silly until you've tried sleeping wet at sea. You sit in one of the hammocks now, feeling the sway, the comfort, the sense that even in this wild world, someone's thinking about how to keep you relatively safe. There's a kind of serenity to it. Sure, you might lose a finger tomorrow, but you'll be compensated, you'll be cared for, and someone will still pass you a biscuit come evening. You overhear a nearby sailor talking about a former shipmate, who, after losing a hand, was allowed to stay on board as a cook. Not because he was particularly good at cooking, but because abandoning him felt wrong. That, and he could still peel potatoes with his teeth. There's even a sort of early mental health awareness, though no one would call it that. A crew member who grows too sullen or jittery might be given time of duty, or reassigned to quieter tasks. Let him stare at the horizon for a while, someone says. He'll be back when his head stops swimming. It's rough around the edges, sure. There's no therapy couch, no quiet meditation room unless you count the poop deck at dawn, but there's recognition. And that's more than most navies offered at the time. You lean back, the wood creaking softly underfoot, and let the wind kiss your cheeks. The injured man limps past you, triumphant, whittling a new cane with surprising elegance. Someone claps him on the back. Another hums a song about a one-legged man outrunning a sea serpent. The day ends not with battle, but with laughter and the quiet rustle of hammocks swinging in rhythm. This isn't just a crew. It's a strange, floating support system, built not on sentiment, but on shared survival. And for now, at least, that feels like enough. By the time the next sunrise peeks over the rippling horizon, you've almost stopped expecting chaos. No shouting, no sword fights over treasure, just the gentle rhythm of rope being pulled taut and a few sleepy groans from hammocks being reluctantly exited. But today, something new is happening. There's a meeting mid-deck again, but this one's not about steering directions or splitting loot. It's about a sock. Yes, a sock. Someone's gone and pinched another crew member's only remaining wool sock, and the ship is on high alert. You watch as the accused stares at the deckboards, one sock clearly mismatched. The aggrieved party holds up a nearly identical sock, waving it like it's a last treaty. The quartermaster steps in not angrily, but with the calm authority of a man who once mediated a 3-hour dispute about whose turn it was to row the dinghy. This is where you learn about the weirdly specific rules many pirate crews had, not just about money and mutiny, but the little things, the everyday nonsense that, left unchecked, would turn even the most disciplined crew into a floating nightmare of petty grievances. One ship's articles you hear about even forbid singing after sundown unless by general consent, as too many tuneless lullabies had apparently caused unrest in the hammocks. Another outlawed whistling altogether. Good luck, says one sailor, tapping the side of his nose. Also annoying. Historians still argue whether these smaller clauses were enforced seriously or simply meant to make the crew laugh. But one thing's certain. Pirate rules weren't just for show. If the articles said no bringing parrots to breakfast, then someone, at some point, brought a parrot to breakfast. Probably twice. The quartermaster, after a brief sock-based interrogation, declares that both socks are now property of the ship's laundry bag until further notice. The crew nod solemnly. Justice is served. You walk along the portside rail, marveling at how these men, so often painted as lawless rogues, actually lived under more daily rules than most people on land. But these weren't cruel or arbitrary. They were there to keep tempers cool and hammocks peaceful. Another rule you overhear: no sneaking extra rum rations. That one seems obvious, but it's surprisingly hard to enforce. One clever sailor once hollowed out a small Bible and tucked a flask inside. His punishment: he had to lead the next Sunday service sober. Then there are rules about hygiene. Pirates weren't exactly sparkling, but they weren't clueless either. Crew members were often assigned to empty chamber pots, air out bedding, and swab the decks not for aesthetics, but to keep the smell and the rats from staging a mutiny of their own. One particularly memorable rule from another ship, you're told, required all crew to bathe at least once per week by being towed behind the ship on a rope. Salt water didn't do much for cleanliness, but it helped scrape off the barnacle of body odor. Sort of as you pass by the cooking area, you notice a curious rule tacked to the wall on a splintered bit of wood: no garlic before battle. You ask why. A nearby pirate just winces. Too distracting, he mutters. Ever tried sword fighting next to someone whose breath could kill barnacles? There's a charming chaos to all of this. These rules weren't made by some high admiral or government clerk. They were forged out of lived experience. Each one a tiny story, a little accident, a squabble that got so bad it had to be immortalized in ink. Another sailor tells you that a past crew member once insisted on composing daily poetry about the sea. It got so bad that a new clause was written: no unsolicited sonnets before breakfast. The man was allowed to keep writing. Just later in the day, you realize, as you sit by a barrel of gently fermenting something or other, that pirate rules are really about tolerance, not of crime or cruelty, but of each other. When you're stuck on a wooden ship in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by salt and sweat and limited snacks, even small annoyances can escalate fast, and so the rules form a kind of social glue. No gambling below decks, no duels without permission, no borrowing someone's boots without asking, especially if those boots are part of their injury compensation package. You overhear another tale. 2 pirates got into a fight over who owned a particularly handsome spoon. Instead of bloodshed, the crew voted to saw it in half and give each a piece. One used his half as a necklace. The other somehow used it to scoop stew. Teamwork? Somewhere around midday, a crewmate offers you a sliver of sun-dried mango and a look at the latest list of updated rules. It includes one new entry: no leaving fake messages in bottles to confuse enemy ships. Apparently, it was causing maritime drama. Historians still can't agree whether some of these rules were copied from ship to ship or developed organically. There's evidence that captains shared articles like recipes tweaking them for the flavor of the crew. One clause you find is hilariously redundant: no sleeping in the crow's nest without a tether, which suggests someone did not by late afternoon. The ship is quiet again. The sock debacle has passed. The galley smells of something boiling hopefully. You stretch out on a crate and watch as the captain himself gently reminds a crew member that parrot-sitting duty is this week's chore rotation. There's peace in the order, a strange calm in the absurdity, and for all the violence that sometimes followed these men, here, in their home at sea, they kept a kind of harmony alive with parchment, peer pressure, and the occasional sock tribunal. Evening rolls in with the sky painted in slow smears of lavender and honey gold, and the deck glows under the setting sun like the inside of a very salty jewelry box. You're leaning on the railing, enjoying the quiet, when you notice something odd. The captain is swabbing the deck, not barking orders, not plotting the next raid, just mopping, and no one seems surprised. This, as it turns out, is one of the lesser-known quirks of pirate life. The captain is only the captain part of the time. That's right on a pirate ship. Leadership isn't a constant state of swagger and shouting. It's more like a hat you wear when needed, and take off when it's time to do chores. See, in the navy or merchant ships of the same period, the captain was king. He could flog a man for sneezing too loud. But here, pirate captains were elected usually for their charisma, experience, and ability to not steer directly into hurricanes. But once the fighting was over or the ship wasn't in active pursuit, they became just another member of the crew. You're told that while the captain gets to lead during battle or storms, the real day-to-day authority often shifts to the quartermaster, who represents the crew's interests and can veto the captain if he starts acting too high and mighty. It's like if your boss could only boss during a fire drill. Historians still argue whether this model made pirate ships more efficient or more chaotic. Some suggest the divided authority led to smoother sailing, others think it invited more arguments about who got the last onion. As the wind softens, you listen in on a quiet conversation near the helm. The quartermaster is gently reminding the captain that he still owes 2 crew members a turn at the spyglass. The captain chuckles and agrees. No thunderous command, no grumbling resentment, just teammates sorting out telescope time. The pirate captain's power was situational, and the crew had every right to replace him, not in a mutiny, but with a vote. If he was cowardly in battle, or too greedy with loot, or just rude at breakfast, one too many times, the crew could hold a meeting, raise their hands or hoax, and elect someone else. Democracy, but saltier. One sailor you chat with tells you about a former captain who was voted out for snoring too loudly. It was echoing in the hull, he says with a grimace. Sounded like a dying walrus. The man was reassigned to anchor duty. Respectfully, of course. Another curious tradition you observe is that captains, while afforded nicer quarters and slightly better food, were still expected to pull their weight. In some cases, they even got a smaller share of the loot than the crew's gunners or carpenters. That's right. The guy who kept the cannon from exploding was often better compensated than the guy who pointed where to fire. This ship, like many others of its time, runs on a kind of meritocracy with a democratic spine. And it makes a sleepy sort of sense. In an environment where everyone relies on each other to survive storms, starvation, and sea monsters, real or exaggerated, ego has to take a back seat. Sometimes, literally, you pass a small card table where the captain is being soundly defeated at cards by the ship's cook, and yet, when the air changes, when the clouds shift, or the lookout spots a distant sail, the mood pivots. The crew falls into roles like it's muscle memory, and the captain, he rises, his voice changes, commands fly, people move. It's like watching a conductor wake up from a nap and launch into a stormy symphony. This duality is what makes pirate captains so unusual. They're not fixed symbols of power. They're tools used when needed, like the emergency bucket, or that one spoon everyone insists is lucky. Historians love to dig into this, whether pirate governance was born of enlightenment ideals or just a practical response to the fact that nobody likes being bossed around by a guy in a fancy hat. Either way, the result was the same: a captain who leads when it counts and steps aside when it doesn't. One night, a younger pirate asked the captain for advice on tying knots. Instead of waving him off, the captain sits down beside him and patiently walks through 3 different versions. This one will save your life in a storm, he says. This one's just to show off. The ship rows gently on a calm sea, and you find yourself drifting into a kind of admiration. Not for the romance of piracy, most of that's made up, but for the way these men carved out a space where rank could flex, where leadership could breathe, and where the guy in charge sometimes had to take out the trash. You're reminded of something whispered earlier by a grizzled deckhand. A captain's only as good as the last vote. It sounds harsh, but there's a freedom in it. A lightness. You can lead without being feared. You can command without being untouchable, and that might just be the strangest treasure this ship carries. You wake to the smell of salt sweat, and something vaguely resembling burnt toast. The sea is calm, the sails slack. It's a rest day, and the crew is lounging wherever there's a bit of shade or breeze. It's the perfect time, someone tells you, to learn about the people behind the eye patches. We're expecting a crew of scowling Englishmen who drink too much and say "yah" at inconvenient moments. What you find instead is a mosaic, a full-blown international patchwork, quilt of backgrounds, languages, and life stories. One man shows you his tattoo symbols from West African traditions. Another hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like an Irish lullaby. And over by the water barrel, a grizzled old fellow with a scarred hand is explaining navigation in fluent Spanish. Turns out, pirate ships were some of the most diverse workplaces of the 18th century. People of African, indigenous, Middle Eastern, Southeast Asian, and European descent often served side by side, not always in perfect harmony, of course, but with a surprising degree of cooperation for the time. You sit beside a man from the Gold Coast who was once enslaved on a sugar plantation. He escaped during a coastal raid and joined the pirates not just to survive, but to thrive. Here, I get a vote, he says, sipping coconut water from a chipped mug. Back there, I wasn't even a person. Historians still debate just how common these success stories were. Some argue they were rare exceptions. Others suggest that pirate crews welcomed outcasts. By necessity, skilled hands were skilled hands, and scurvy doesn't care about skin color. There's even evidence scraps of testimony, dusty ledgers, old sea shanties that pirates freed enslaved people deliberately, not just to look good, but to recruit. Slavery, after all, was the law of the land. Pirates lived outside it, so they often rejected the whole concept, though not always for noble reasons. One particularly infamous pirate, you're told, once freed a cargo of enslaved people, and then invited them to join his crew. Half accepted. The others, they were dropped off at a safe harbor with food, clothing, and instructions to avoid British ships for a while. A kind of pirate severance package. You can't help but notice the ease with which people on this ship slip between languages and accents. Orders are barked in English, clarified in French, confirmed in IGBO, and sung in something that might be Malay. A proper Tower of Babel, but with better hats. This melting pot wasn't just about race, it included religion, age, and gender too. There were Muslim pirates who prayed on deck at dawn, Catholic ones who crossed themselves before boarding enemy ships, and even the odd atheist who only believed in rum and the wind. And yes, though it's hard to spot, there were women aboard too. Disguised sometimes, yes, but other times, openly part of the crew. The stories of Anne Bonny and Mary Read are well known, but many others are lost to time, to false names, to smoky tavern legends. One crewman swears the best navigator he ever sailed with was a woman from Jamaica who could read the stars like a gossip pamphlet. You meet a wiry, weathered man missing two fingers who tells you he used to be a tailor in Lisbon. I stitch sails now, he says with a grin, and occasionally people. Next to him is a former merchant from Goa, who can't steer to save his life, but makes the sheep's best dried mango strips. It all begins to make sense. Pirate crews valued skill over pedigree, and in a world that worshipped social hierarchy, that made them oddly egalitarian. You didn't need to own land or have noble blood. You just needed to be useful and not a complete jerk. One pirate leans over and says, with the faintest trace of pride, "We take who the world throws out." He gestures to the sleeping forms of crewmates, some dark-skinned, some pale, one snoring dramatically with his foot in a bucket. And we make a crew out of it, of course. It wasn't all utopian bliss. Fights still broke out. Prejudices still bubbled. But the articles, the pirate rules you learned about earlier, often included lines that forbade discrimination among the crew. They had to. After all, when your survival depends on the guy next to you knowing how to tie a reef knot or load a cannonball, you start to care a lot less about where he was born. Some historians go further, suggesting that pirate ships weren't just ahead of their time, they were a kind of floating counterculture, challenging the norms of empire, class, and colonialism with every sail unfurled. Others are more cautious, reminding us that these were still criminals, not revolutionaries, and we shouldn't romanticize them too much. Fair. But as you lean back and listen to a Brazilian fiddler and a Moroccan drummer improvise a duet on deck, it's hard not to feel that something rare floated through these waters. Something wilder than law, stronger than empire. A crew held together not by sameness, but by shared risk, and for you, nestled into a coil of rope that smells vaguely of sardines and rosemary. That's oddly comforting. It's early morning now. The horizon blushes gently in soft shades of melon and mist, and the crew is already bustling, though not with pillaging or cannon drills. Today, it's all about the pirate shores. Yes, you heard that right. Being a pirate might sound like an endless blur of rum and raids, but in reality, much of the time was spent doing the kind of work that would make a monk weep with boredom. Still, it all had to be done, because if you don't swat the deck, patch the sails, mend the hammocks, and scrub the mold of the pickled fish barrels, your glorious criminal enterprise starts to smell like bad cheese and falls apart faster than a leaky dinghy. You're handed a stiff brush and shown how to scour the deck seams, which are always full of mysterious goo. It's a rite of passage. You notice even the most hardened pirates take their turn. No one is above the slime. A wiry old bosun explains that cleanliness wasn't just for show, it was survival. Left unchecked, a filthy ship meant disease, rot, and rats with an attitude. And you do not want to wake up with a rat chewing on your toe because you let breadcrumbs fester in your bedroll. Historians still argue whether pirates were significantly cleaner than naval ships, or just less disastrously filthy. Some journals suggest pirates kept stricter hygiene rules simply because no one was forced to be there. You wanted to keep your crew alive? Then yes, mop that mess and air the damp socks. Your next task is helping the carpenter, a soft-spoken giant with hands the size of sea turtles. He shows you how to inspect planks for signs of dry rot. A job both dull and crucial, because one weak plank mid-ocean can turn your pirate adventure into an accidental swimming lesson. After that comes sail patching. You're introduced to a pile of canvas full of holes, some burned by sparks, others shredded by wind or bullets. One sail bears a large rib that looks suspiciously like the silhouette of a chicken. No one wants to explain. Sewing sails requires enormous needles, calloused fingers, and infinite patience. There's a certain rhythm to it, though a lullaby of motion. You begin to understand why some pirates found peace in it. There's honor in keeping the ship alive. Then comes maintenance of the weapons. The powder barrels are checked for moisture, the flintlocks cleaned, the cannons polished and re-secured. You're shown how to temp and repack a cannon, which sounds exciting, until you're halfway through your third barrel of gunpowder and your arms feel like boiled noodles. Pirates didn't always have the luxury of port stops, so they had to be their own mechanics, medics, and janitors. A loose rigging knot could mean a snapped mast, a dirty blade might infect a wound, and a poorly stored biscuit barrel, well, let's just say the last guy to open one found more weevils than wheat. Speaking of food, it's time for galley duty. You wander into the cramped sheep's kitchen, where two cooks are arguing over whether the fish stew should contain apples. Spoiler, it shouldn't. But you smile politely and stir the pot anyway. Meals aboard a pirate ship were a mix of resourcefulness and desperation. Salt pork, sheep's biscuit, dried fruit if they were lucky. When the stores ran low, the creativity kicked in. Seaweed fritters, fried jellyfish, and something referred to only as the mystery mash. You decide not to ask. A nearby barrel leaks a pungent liquid, and the cook tells you it's vinegar used to clean utensils and disinfect water barrels. Not delicious, but smart. Pirates knew that stagnant water could kill faster than any navy. Historians point out that pirates were often better fed than merchant sailors. Why? Because they stole the good stuff. While navy rations were predictable and grim, pirates could raid spice ships, rum caravans, and fancy European vessels stuffed with cheese wheels and dried figs. One time, a ship celebrated their loot with flaming mango puddings. That party ended with 2 fights and a broken fiddle. As the sun climbs, you pass by the laundry line strung between the masts. Yes, pirates did laundry. You watch as someone cheerfully slaps seawater wash shirts against the railing, then hangs them to dry beside a pair of very frilly underpants that definitely do not belong to the carpenter. You notice how everyone pitches in. Labor was shared, not ordered. There were no barked commands, no lashings for laziness. If someone slacked off, their share of loot might be reduced, or worse, they might lose hammock privileges. Discipline through inconvenience. There's something soothing about this low-level hum of industry. The ship creaks gently, ropes sway, pots clatter softly. No drama, no cannon fire. Just the sound of people keeping their home afloat, stitch by stitch and mop by mop. One pirate, missing 2 teeth but full of opinions, says, "A clean deck and a patched sail, that's luck." Right there. You believe him. You pause beside the railing, feeling the steady bob of the ship beneath you, and marvel at how much of piracy was just work. Gloriously mundane, oddly noble work. Less about treasure chests and more about caulking seams before the next squall rolls in, and you realize that even in this lawless floating society, routine is what keeps the chaos at bay. You smile as you watch the quartermaster inspecting hammocks for mites while balancing a teacup in one hand. Pirates, it seems, were rowdy rebels with to-do lists, and somehow that's even better than fiction. By now, you've settled into the rhythm of the ship, the creak of timbers, the slap of sails, the occasional snore of a passed-out crewmate in the sun. It's calm, even peaceful, but don't get too comfortable, because today, something's off, the crew is whispering. Side glances bounce across the deck like skipped stones. You overhear murmurs about food going missing, and rumors that the captain may have secretly changed course without consulting the quartermaster. You don't know it yet, but this is how it starts. A pirate mutiny, but not the kind you're used to seeing in movies. There are no sudden sword fights or dramatic betrayals with background lightning. No one's walking the plank. In fact, most pirate mutinies were weirdly civilized, On pirate ships, if the crew disagreed with the captain, they didn't necessarily draw cutlasses, they held a vote. Seriously, a show of hands could change the entire command structure. That's the kind of DIY democracy you're floating on right now. Historians still argue whether these votes were always fair or if charismatic troublemakers just shouted the loudest. But the fact remains, a captain's authority only held as long as the crew believed he deserved it. And if he didn't, well, they replaced him. Today, you see it play out firsthand. The quartermaster, the closest thing this ship has to an HR department, calls a meeting on the main deck. His voice is calm, his gestures slow, but everyone listens. There are complaints, he says. Food has been lighter. Extra rations may have been pocketed. Navigation feels suspiciously zigzaggy. The captain, a heavy-browed man who smells faintly of oranges and old cannon grease, folds his arms and says nothing. But you can tell he knows this isn't just about bread. It's about trust. The crew doesn't shout. Instead, someone pulls at the ship's articles that contract you signed back in Section 3. Turns out it includes a clause for situations like this. If enough of the crew demands a hearing, the captain must respond. It's pirate law, not exactly due process, but a sleepy cousin of it. They gather in a circle, seated on overturned barrels and crates. One pirate holds a chicken like a gavel. Apparently, it's ceremonial. Each man speaks his piece. The accusations aren't wild or angry, more like quiet frustration. Did the captain knowingly route them toward weaker targets? Did he skim extra coin during last week's division of spoils? Has he been hoarding dry pears? These are serious questions. Eventually, a vote is called. Every hand rises, including yours, though mostly because you're caught up in the peer pressure and that chicken is staring at you. The result: the captain stays, but under close watch. His powers are temporarily limited. The quartermaster will oversee the next raid, and the books will be double-checked. Justice, pirate style, you exhale. Mutiny averted, or at least postponed. What's remarkable is how routine this is. On land, such rebellion would be treason. On a pirate ship, it's Tuesday. And it's all part of the culture that made these crews so oddly effective. They didn't blindly follow orders, they followed consensus, or at least majority opinion, strongly voiced and sometimes accompanied by passive-aggressive wrong-withholding. You learn later that some mutinies did succeed, and those could get messy. Captains overthrown were often marooned with a bottle of water, a loaded pistol, and the gentle encouragement not to cause any more problems. Others were simply left at the next friendly port, grumbling into their beard. Still, it's not all drama. You recall the story of one captain who encouraged a vote every month, just to keep himself honest. Apparently, he'd bring cookies. Smart man. One fringe tale whispers of a ship run entirely by rotating captains, each serving for one day. It lasted 6 weeks before they sailed in a circle for 3 days straight and gave up. That one didn't make it into the textbooks. There's a strange comfort in all this. You came aboard expecting command and conquer chaos. Instead, you find pirate ships operated more like floating cooperatives with rules, consequences, and the occasional vote of no confidence. Even the pirates who disagreed with the vote today, they nod, they shrug, they go back to work, because tomorrow is another wind-swept, sword-soaked day. And frankly, nobody wants to ruin dinner over politics. As the sun lowers, the captain leans against the helm, more contemplative than angry. He looks at you and says, "A ship's only as strong as the hands that run it." Then he flicks a dry pear core into the sea. Was that a confession? Maybe, but no one follows up. Instead, the crew pulls out fiddles. Someone starts humming a sea shanty, and the day ends not with mutiny, but music. You think back on how rare that is in history, a group of armed, desperate men choosing compromise over chaos. It's not perfect. It never was. But tonight, the ship sails on, still afloat, still united, still strangely democratic. The moon is rising, a lopsided pearl in a velvet sky, and the ship glides forward under its glow like a shadow dreaming of land. You walk the deck slowly, tracing the smooth grain of the railing with your fingertips. The mutiny scare has passed. The captain is quiet, and the quartermaster hums to himself while polishing a spyglass. Things somehow have returned to normal. But as you step near the rear of the ship, you notice something odd. A cluster of pirates seated in a circle. Their voices low, heads bowed, shoulders shaking with laughter. They're playing a game. You pause, just out of reach, and watch. Turns out, pirates had a surprising number of hobbies, and many of them revolved around stories, jokes, all strange makeshift sports involving pebbles and rum bottles. After all, when you're trapped on a floating wooden island with the same dozen people for weeks on end, you need something to keep boredom and cabin fever from setting in. Tonight's entertainment is a sort of riddle game. One sailor gives a cryptic clue about a port they visited, and the others must guess it. The winner gets first pick of dried mangoes from the sheep's dwindling stash. High stakes indeed, but it isn't just games. You notice a small, worn book being passed around. Poetry likely pilfered from a merchant ship and recited with surprising tenderness by a man with tattoos of angry seagulls on both forearms. This ship, you realize, is full of little routines, comforts, repetitions that kept these sailors human amidst all the looting and yelling. There's the carpenter who sings softly to his hammer, the cook who insists the beans taste better if you whisper encouragement while they boil, the grizzled helmsman who carefully knots and unknots the same bit of rope each night before sleep. Like it's a prayer, historians still debate how much of pirate life was brutal necessity and how much was, well, oddly domestic. These men didn't just survive, they carved out rituals and relationships to soften the hard edges of life at sea. Yes, they raided ships and broke laws, but they also told bedtime stories, made inside jokes, and formed friendships as salty and enduring as the ocean itself. Take, for instance, the messmate system, a common pairing where two pirates would eat together, divide chores, and even share spoils. Not for romance, necessarily, though sometimes that, too, but for mutual survival. You didn't want to be alone out here. You needed someone who'd save the last biscuit for you, or at least split it. Some messmates even sewed hidden pockets into each other's coats, just in case a raid went badly. If I'm down, one might say, "You take the coin from my left sleeve." And don't you dare forget a strange trust, forged between cannon fire and late-night fish stew. You pass a pair of pirates huddled over a small bundle of fabric. They're embroidering. Yes, embroidering, one carefully outlining a rose in red thread, the other stitching a miniature sea serpent. The thread's likely stolen, the talent genuine. You resist the urge to ask for a patch of your own. Then there are the storytellers, every ship had them. Men who could spin yarns about lost cities or cursed treasures, not because they were true, but because they kept the cold at bay. One old sailor begins now, a tale of a ghost ship made entirely of glass, doomed to sail the equator forever. His voice is slow, rhythmic, hypnotic. You barely catch the punchline. Something about sea cucumbers being the true captains all along. It's silly. And it's perfect. One fringe anecdote, barely recorded in dusty logbooks, tells of a pirate crew that organized a full theatrical performance on deck while docked for repairs. They built a stage from crates, fashioned costumes from sails, and wrote a play involving a lovesick kraken. It was, reportedly, terrible but deeply beloved. A passing theory from one historian suggests that pirate ships may have had better mental health outcomes than many 18th century naval crews, simply because they allowed room for laughter, even if it was dark, crude, or involved a rubber chicken stolen from a circus vessel. Don't ask, long story, closing parenthesis. As the night deepens, you hear music. Someone's brought out a concertina. The tune is soft, clumsy, but the rhythm is steady. A lullaby for the sea. Others hum along, their eyes closed. No war cries here. Just sword, sky, and the comfort of noise made together. The captain, still under informal review, joins the circle and tosses a small pouch of spices into the cook's pot without a word. The cook nods solemnly. The tension has melted, replaced with the warm inertia of shared exhaustion. You realize that these men, while feared and hunted, were deeply reliant on each other, not just for gold, but for joy. They survived on more than rations. They survived on routine, rhythm, and really tough jokes. One pirate sidles up beside you, offers you a sliver of candied ginger, and says, "Every sheep's got two treasures, the gold and the crew. One gets you fed, the other gets you through the storms. You choose slowly." It's sweet and spicy and sticks to your teeth, and in this moment, quiet, surrounded by bad jokes and surprisingly earnest embroidery, you begin to understand something strange. Maybe the pirates weren't just rebellious sailors. Maybe they were found families, held together by laughter, music, and mango ration diplomacy. The ship sways gently, and the tune fades into the wind. You wake to a faint rhythmic thumping, someone pacing above deck, boots falling in steady time like a heartbeat over timber. When you step up into the morning breeze, the sun is barely up, pink and orange, stretching across the clouds like they're being slowly painted in. The crew is already stirring, and no one seems in a rush to be dangerous. You expected pirate life to be constant violence, roaring battles, and shouted commands. Instead, much of it is downtime, floating, waiting, preparing. And during these long lulls between raids, pirates found all sorts of ways to pass the time, and some of it was downright wholesome. Someone's whittling a spoon. Another is braiding bits of rope into a net that may or may not have an actual purpose. And then you hear it, the unmistakable rise of voices in song. Sea shanties, some of key, but with undeniable energy. You pause near the mainmast. A small group of pirates has formed a sort of chorus. They're stomping, clapping, passing around a dented tankard like a makeshift baton. The lyrics are nonsensical. Something about a shark falling in love with a mermaid who ran off with a lobster. The chorus? Irresistibly catchy. These songs weren't just for fun. Shanties served as coordination tools, especially during tasks like raising sails or hauling anchor. They set rhythm, maintained pace, and distracted the body from pain. But once the work was done, the music stuck around a kind of emotional glue, binding a ragtag group of seafarers into something like a brotherhood. You're handed a harmonica. You've never played one. They don't seem to care. Some historians argue that pirate culture may have actually preserved oral traditions better than more civilized parts of the world, simply because they had no printing presses, no official records. If you wanted to remember something, a tale, a recipe, a warning, you sang it, or carved it into the side of a barrel. And then there were the games. You wander to the Po, where a game of slap coin is in progress. The rules are unclear. There's definitely a coin involved. Also slapping. It seems to involve bluffing, terrible accents, and shouting the name Bartholomew at random intervals. One pirate explains it's a game from a port in Madagascar. Another insists it's Brazilian. They both might be right. Pirate ships were floating melting pots, collecting people, stories, and pastimes from around the world. And in those stretches of ocean where nothing moved for days but waves and gulls, those bits of cultural flotsam were the difference between sanity and mutiny. Some crews even developed their own slang, like floating dialects. One French-English crew reportedly communicated almost entirely in gestures, whistles, and insult-based nicknames. Captain Squidface was not an insult, but a term of endearment, though the captain never seemed too thrilled about it. There's a long-standing theory that some pirates developed secret signs, tiny finger ticks or knots in a kerchief to share private jokes or warnings without alarming outsiders. A sort of pirate inside language, used to communicate across crowded taverns or during tense negotiations. And then there were the pets. Oh, the pets. As you head toward the stern, you nearly trip over a parrot wearing a bit of cloth around its neck like a bib. It squawks a mildly rude phrase in Portuguese and waddles away with astonishing confidence. Several pirates look up and nod as if this is completely normal. One even gives the bird a polite good morning. Admiral. Parrots, monkeys, goats, even cats. Pirates often kept animals aboard, not just for company, but sometimes for symbolic or superstitious reasons. One ship supposedly had a pig they claimed could predict weather by the curl of its tail. Another had a monkey named Harold who was better than any compass, though no one could explain what that meant. You ask if the parrot has a name. We just call him Sir, a pirate explains. He outranks the captain. Perhaps the most charming thing is the ship's small notice board, nailed next to the galley. Bits of parchment are pinned there with fish bones or splinters, messages, sketches, complaints, jokes. Today's featured note reads, "To whoever borrowed my socks, may barnacles take root in your boots." You see, pirate life wasn't all swords and scurvy. Much of it was just with roommates with sea legs, figuring out how to stay sane, safe, and vaguely entertained. One document from the time, rare and likely smuggled out by a spy, describes a crew that held monthly, non-violent duels, where disagreements were settled by a dance-off, judged by the cook. It's unclear whether this was common or just a fluke, but the image of two grizzled pirates aggressively waltzing to settle an argument over hammock space is perfect. You spot a pair of pirates playing chess using carved shell pieces. The board is hand-painted on a barrel top. When one of them captures a rook, he sings a single dramatic note as if scoring a silent film. They laugh. They've played this match 5 times already today. Down in the galley, the cook is hosting a mini competition for most creative sea stew. Today's entries include squid with raisins, fish and hardtack crumble, and something involving pickled turnips that is either genius or a war crime. Historians still argue whether pirates adopted these pastimes from seafarer traditions or created them anew, but the end result was the same. A culture that survived boredom through creativity, through shared rituals. Even if it meant inventing a new game every week just to make someone smile, the boat rocks gently. A breeze picks up, scattering salt through your hair and carrying the fading laughter of the slap coin tournament. And you sit near the wheel, watching a new game begin. This one involves coconuts and a lot of yelling. No idea how it works. Doesn't matter. It works, and the ship sails on. The wind shifts slightly as you lean back against a crate near the stern. Above you, the sails billow with a lazy sort of enthusiasm, the kind that suggests no storm is coming, just enough momentum to push the ship along and keep boredom at bay. And somewhere in the background, almost as if it were always playing, is the subtle hum of rules being followed. Yes, really, pirate ships had rules. Not just vague suggestions shouted over cannon fire, but actual, written or sometimes just memorized codes of conduct that every member of the crew was expected to follow. They were called the Articles of Agreement, and they weren't just ceremonial fluff. And what's most surprising, pirates actually enforced them. You see it in real time when a wiry sailor named Amos tries to swipe an extra portion of dried mango from the rations barrel. It's not much, barely a palmful, but within moments, the quartermaster is there, one eyebrow raised like he's seen this all before. Article 12. The quartermaster says calmly, "No hoarding the mangoes. You want more when eating cards." Amos sighs and nods, handing back the fruit with theatrical regret. The crew nearby chuckles, not cruelly, more like a group of co-workers watching someone get caught sneaking an extra slice of birthday cake. This isn't a harsh punishment. There's no plank walking, just accountability, a moment of fairness, and a reminder. The pirate code isn't just a story, it's the law of the ship. Some historians believe that the enforcement of pirate articles may have actually made these crews more stable and cooperative than many naval or merchant ships of the time. Unlike Navy crews who were often pressed into service and beaten into obedience, pirates joined willingly, and they knew the rules going in. Take the story of the ship Revenge, where one sailor broke the rule against fighting on board. Instead of punishment by flogging, he had to swab the deck for a week while wearing a ridiculous hat made of fish bones. Mild humiliation was apparently more effective than violence. Scholars still debate whether this kind of enforcement was genuinely consistent or more of a myth pirates like to tell themselves. After all, there were plenty of pirate ships where things went off the rails. But there's no denying that in many cases, the code was treated with genuine respect. Some of the rules were strictly practical: no stealing from your fellow crew members, no gambling during battle prep, keep your weapons clean. Others were oddly poetic. One article from a West African-based pirate crew prohibited singing said songs after sunset. Supposedly, it lowered morale and tempted storms. And then there were the codes about equality, shockingly progressive for the early 18th century. On several ships, the articles stated that every man received equal voting rights, a fixed share of loot, and a say in major decisions. Even the captain couldn't override the collective vote, unless it was an emergency. This form of shipboard democracy was so unusual that some British naval officers who were captured and later released described it with equal parts horror and fascination. One admiral reportedly grumbled, "They live like philosophers and vote like parliaments, but smell far worse." Sometimes, the code even offered a kind of pirate clemency. On a ship called the Rising Wind, there was a rule that if you got into a personal quarrel, you could either settle it in a duel of ship or perform a chore requested by the crew to make amends. One fight over a lost comb ended with a pirate building a hammock for every other crew member, which he reportedly did with excessive grumbling and some degree of flair. What made this lost stick wasn't fear, it was buy-in. Everyone knew that without rules, the fragile balance of pirate life would crumble. When the stakes are treasure, food, and survival, trust isn't optional. It's your most valuable currency. And sometimes the code was funny on purpose. You stumble upon a chalkboard near the galley that reads, "Ship rules amended by group vote. Tuesday after lunch. No duels before breakfast." Captain's parrot is not a valid alibi. If you snore, sleep near the anchor. No using barnacles as currency. Was that an actual article? Possibly. Or maybe it was a joke that became tradition, like bring your own mug Wednesdays or complain in song only hour. The point is, the pirate code wasn't a joke, but it allowed for jokes. It created boundaries that could still bend, a sense of order that didn't rely on cruelty or fear. And that's perhaps the most endearing thing of all. Pirates understood that a community without shared values, however strange, would collapse. Even punishment was often handled with an odd sort of grace. Instead of lashing or imprisonment, a crew might sentence someone to clean the privy buckets for a week or sleep under the dinghy. On a few ships, offenders were made to stand on the mast and recite bad poetry as penance. Whether this improved morale or just caused confusion is, well, still being debated. There's a long-standing academic question. Were pirates truly egalitarian, or just self-interested rebels who mimicked fairness when it served them? The answer, like the sea, is probably somewhere in the middle. But you can't deny that their commitment to fairness, real or performative, kept many of them alive. As you drift toward the midship to lie in your hammock, you hear laughter coming from the card game corner. A pirate has just attempted to bluff with an imaginary hand. The judge, a cook holding a wooden spoon like a scepter, has ruled this bold but illegal. The guilty party is sentenced to sing the ode to a mackerel in falsetto, and everyone claps, because the code was followed. The sea is quiet now, like it's holding its breath. The waves have lost their urgency, and the ship rocks with a rhythm that's almost hypnotic. Somewhere below deck, you hear the faint twang of a banjo, badly tuned but endearing. And overhead, a sailor patches a sail by moonlight, humming softly. It feels peaceful, oddly so, especially when you remember this is a pirate ship. You might expect chaos, rebellion, and general mayhem to rule here. But instead, you've got harmony, chores getting done, and a crew that, while salty and a bit unwashed, seems to work together like a very peculiar, slightly drunken orchestra. And the most ironic part, naval officers noticed. Yes, the very same officers who called pirates scourges of the sea and lawless vermin were quietly taking notes, because while pirates were off the official rulebooks, their teamwork was enviable and borderline revolutionary. Unlike most naval ships, which relied on strict hierarchies, harsh discipline, and little to no consent from their crew, pirate ships were running on mutual agreement and democratic input. Naval reports from the 18th century show that some officers were baffled at just how well organized pirate crews could be. A few even confessed in carefully worded letters that pirates maintained better ship cleanliness and faster response times in storms than Royal Navy crews. One midshipman wrote that a captured pirate sloop was disgustingly informal, but alarmingly efficient. There's even a whispered story of a British Navy captain, Captain Endicott, who allegedly rewrote his ship's crew structure after encountering a pirate vessel whose men elected their quartermaster. He didn't copy the whole pirate setup, of course. That would have gotten him court-martialed. But he began allowing his men to vote on meal rotations, short leave schedules, and who got to clean the bilge. A few of his fellow officers mocked him for it. But his ship had fewer fights, cleaner decks, and apparently much better morale. Who would have guessed? The contrast is stark. On a traditional Navy ship, sailors were often pressed into service, literally kidnapped or tricked while drunk, and then expected to obey without question. Punishments were brutal. Lashings, shackles, or worse. Pay was irregular. Food was often moldy, and camaraderie, while real, was often forged in resentment. Pirates, by contrast, chose this life. That meant something. They signed on knowing the risks, but also knowing they'd get a voice. The fact that they could vote on big decisions, where to sail, who to attack, what to do with prisoners, gave them a sense of ownership. It wasn't just the captain's ship. It was their ship, of course. Let's not get too romantic. Pirates weren't peace-loving utopians. There were still plenty of fights, betrayals, and self-serving choices. But when it came to keeping a crew working smoothly, they had systems and systems that worked. Historians still argue whether pirates actually influenced naval reforms directly, or if those reforms happened in parallel as navies evolved. But it's hard to ignore the timing. Within a few decades of the pirate golden age, naval ships began softening some practices. Flogging was gradually reduced. Pay became more standardized. Sailors were allowed more shore leave and marginally better food. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe someone, somewhere in an Admiralty office, read one-to-many reports like this. Crew aboard the Night Bloom executed a sail shift maneuver in record time. No shouting from the captain. No whip used. All crew moved as one, suspiciously happy. Even merchant ships took notice. Some captains started loosening the reins, introducing crew councils and small shares of profit. Not out of kindness, heavens no, but because it worked. Productivity increased, revolts decreased, and ships started arriving on time with more cargo intact, and fewer sailors trying to jump overboard mid-voyage. You find a journal tucked away in a storage locker, its cover stained with fish oil and soot. Inside are daily notes by a merchant ship officer named Timmons. On page 43, in a cramped, embarrassed scrawl, it reads, "Try the pirate voting method today. Crew chose to eat beans instead of salt pork. Morale up, less groaning. Odd sense of unity. Might try again." And then, a few pages later, assigned hammock corners by drawing lots. Fighting stopped. Jenkins said it was weirdly fair. Must watch him, he's starting to smile. It's a curious thing how structures meant for rebellion could inform the very institutions they opposed. Even now, researchers debate. Were pirates proto-unionists? Libertarian radicals? Accidental social scientists in bandanas? Whatever you call them, one thing's certain. They made teamwork look good, and not just efficient but appealing. The idea that you could live wild, chase treasure, and still be part of a functional workplace with policies, shared values, and break-time sea shanties. That's powerful. It's no wonder their legacy stuck around, not just in the fantasy of buried gold and parrots, but in the real-world sense that work doesn't have to be miserable. You glance around the deck. A pirate is helping another patch. A ribbed boot with old sailcloth. Someone's drawing a very unflattering cartoon of the captain who, when he sees it, snots and offers corrections. And down near the galley, a cook is letting the crew vote on whether tonight's stew will include turnips. Turnips lose narrowly. It's oddly heartwarming. The pirate code, the votes, the corporation, it all feels like a system that real people built. Not perfect, but adaptable. Messy, but fair. And isn't that what any workplace, sea or land, really needs? The sea has taken on that soft shimmer again, the kind that looks like velvet if you squint just right. The wind has quieted, and so has the crew. Hammocks creak gently in rhythm, like rocking chairs in a long-forgotten front porch somewhere. Far from cannonballs and salted fish, you sit near the stern, where the moon hangs low and yellow over the water, and let the calm soak in. It's the end of something. Not just another pirate tale, but the slow unwinding of an era, because for all their innovation, teamwork, and democratic flair, pirate life didn't last forever. It couldn't. The 18th century slowly closed its arms around the oceans. More patrols, more prisons, more bureaucracy. Treaties were signed, colonies expanded, and suddenly every patch of sea had a flag flapping over it. The wide open waters that once let you vanish with a vote and a crew became busy, patrolled and painfully civilized. The pirate golden age didn't end in a bang, it dissolved, like mist at sunrise. Fewer captains dared fly the black flag. Ports that once welcomed pirates became hostile or paranoid. And the naval forces, now watching more closely and copying some of the best ideas, left little room for freelance swashbuckling. You imagine the last few crews holding votes under starlight, watching familiar towns grow unfamiliar. Some hung up their hats, some joined the merchant navy or faded into tavern legends. And a few, just a few, kept sailing into nowhere, hoping the old world hadn't quite caught up. Historians still argue whether pirates truly vanished, or merely evolved into new roles: smugglers, traders, adventurers who dropped the title, but kept the spirit. One thing is certain: the feeling of piracy, the camaraderie, the irreverence, the low-tech democracy it echoes on. You stretch your legs and notice something. You've been working this whole time, not raiding or pillaging, nothing dramatic, but imagining, collaborating in your mind, gently patching together the sense of a floating society that thrived on balance, where every crew member mattered, where the rules were clear and the rum was shared, where order didn't come from fear, but from consent. It's ironic, really, how a group history painted as rogues and villains were often better at being fair than many civilized systems around them. Pirates didn't invent justice, but they did something brave. They built it from scratch, out on the waves, with whatever driftwood and cannonballs they had on hand. And now, here in the soft hush of a story's end, you feel a strange comfort in knowing that even amidst the rum and the chaos, these ships were home to something quietly noble. The ship creaks once more. One last shift of the sails. Someone snores to hammocks over. Another mutters in their sleep about turnips. The lanterns burn low. The sea accepts your silence, and the age of pirate teamwork gently sails into memory. And now, with the sails drawn in and the moon keeping gentle watch over your floating thoughts, it's time to let the story recede into the tide. You feel the air cool slightly, just enough to notice, like the brush of canvas on your arm. Everything slows here. The rocking of the ship is subtle now, like your breath sinking with the motion of something much older, much quieter. It doesn't matter where the ship is headed anymore. It only matters that you're warm, safe, and drifting. You might think back to the Articles of Agreement, the way pirates made space for fairness in a world that offered them none, or the unlikely respect they showed to each other in between cannon blasts and breadfruit stews. But those details are fading now, soft around the edges like ink left in the rain. All that's left is the hush. A night sky unbothered by time, a crew whose laughter is distant, like echoes from a dream, and your own breathing steady, surrounded by the imagined sway of old timbers and the quiet authority of starlight. There's no need to climb down from the ship. You're already where you need to be. Let the boat carry you slowly, gently, into deeper rest. The pirates are sleeping now, and so are you.